They told him she was just a stray, an omega, the lowest of the low. They said picking her up would be a 5-minute job. But when the sun rose over the mountains of Montana, 12 of the Alpha King's elite enforcers were broken, unconscious, or begging for mercy. And she was gone. She didn't just run, she hunted them. Now, Gideon Blackwood doesn't want her head on a spike. He wants to know how a girl with no claws and no rank took down a hit squad. And he's coming to find out himself. This is the story of Serafina Hart. The neon sign of Sal's diner buzzed with a dying electrical hum, flickering against the heavy snowfall that blanketed the outskirts of Butte, Montana. It was 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The roads were dead, the air was sharp enough to freeze breath in the lungs, and Serafina Hart was scrubbing a coffee stain off the counter with a fervor that bordered on obsessive. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this town. Not in this life. At 24, Sarah looked like nothing more than a tired grad student or a runaway trying to blend into the woodwork. She wore an oversized flannel shirt, grease-stained jeans, and a name tag that read Molly. Her hair, a dark, tangled mess of chestnut curls, was pulled back in a messy bun, exposing the smooth, pale skin of her neck. There was no mark there, no pack tattoo, no mating bite, just skin. To the trained nose, she smelled like rain and faint vanilla, soft, unassuming, and unmistakably omega. The weakest rank, the submissive caste, or so the biology books said. The bell above the door jingled, the sound jarring in the quiet diner. A blast of Arctic wind swept in, followed by 3 men. Sarah didn't look up immediately. She kept scrubbing, but her entire body went rigid. The scent hit her before they even stomped the snow off their heavy combat boots. It was a smell of musk, pine, and aggression. Enforcers. "We're closed," Sarah said, her voice raspy. She didn't turn around. "Sign says open till midnight, darling," the first man said. His voice was a deep rumble, laced with the arrogance of an alpha who had never been told no. Sarah turned slowly. There were 3 of them, but she knew there would be more outside. Enforcers for a high pack never traveled in odd numbers. They traveled in squads. These 3 were huge, broad shoulders straining against leather jackets, eyes flashing with unnatural amber hues as they scanned the room. The leader, a man with a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow, stepped forward. He pulled a crumpled photograph from his pocket and slapped it onto the counter. Seen her. Sarah looked at the photo. It was grainy, taken from a security camera 3 years ago in Seattle. She looked younger, terrified, her eyes wide and haunted. "Nope," Sarah lied, her heartbeat steady. She had learned to control her pulse years ago, a necessity for survival. "Looks like she's in trouble, though." The scarred man laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "She stole something from the Blackwood pack. The king wants it back." The king... The rag in Sarah's hand stopped moving. Gideon Blackwood, the alpha of alphas, the man who united the West Coast packs through sheer, brutal commerce and strategic violence. If Blackwood's men were this far east, she wasn't just being hunted, she was being erased. "Don't know the name," Sarah said, turning back to the coffee pot. "You boys want coffee, or are you going to let me close up?" The scarred man signaled. The other 2 moved to flank the counter. "Drop the act, Serafina. We tracked your scent trail from the bus station. It's faint, but it's you. Omega." He spat the word Omega like a curse. "You have 2 choices," the man continued, leaning over the counter, invading her space. "You come quietly, and maybe the king lets you keep your fingers, or we drag you out, and I let the boys have a little fun before we toss you in the cage." Sarah sighed. It was a heavy, mournful sound. She reached under the counter, but not for a weapon. She turned off the coffee machine. "You brought 12 men," she said softly. The scarred man blinked. "What?" "I can smell the others. 6 around the back perimeter. 3 in the SUV across the street. And you 3 idiots in here." Sarah finally looked him in the eye. Her irises were a warm, honey brown, but in that moment, they looked flat, dead. "You brought a SWAT team for one Omega waitress?" "Standard protocol," the man sneered, reaching for her arm. Sarah moved. She didn't shift. She didn't grow claws. She grabbed the pot of boiling coffee she had just taken off the burner and smashed it directly into the scarred man's face. He screamed, a guttural, wet sound, as the scalding liquid and glass shards blinded him. Before the other 2 could process the violence, Sarah vaulted over the counter. She didn't run for the door. She ran at them. She drove her knee into the groin of the second man, hearing the satisfying crunch of cartilage, then spun and slammed a ceramic sugar dispenser into the temple of the third. He dropped like a sack of cement. "That's 3, she whispered. She kicked the back door open and sprinted into the snowy darkness of the parking lot. The cold air bit at her skin, but adrenaline turned it into fuel. She could hear the shouts from the SUV and the radio chatter of the men circling the back. They were wolves, apex predators, faster and stronger than any human. But Sarah knew the terrain. She scrambled up the rusty ladder of the water tower behind the diner. Halfway up, she stopped. Below, the shadows of wolves, huge hulking beasts in mid-shift, were tearing through the alleyway. "There she is!" one shouted, still in human form. "Up the tower!" Gunfire erupted. Bullets sparked against the metal rungs. Sarah winced as a shard of metal grazed her cheek, drawing blood. She didn't keep climbing. She pulled a flare gun from the waistband of her jeans, stolen from the diner's emergency kit months ago, and aimed not at the men, but at the large propane tank sitting next to the diner's dumpster. "Sorry, Sal," she muttered. She pulled the trigger. The flare hissed through the air, a streak of red in the monochrome night. It struck the leaking valve of the tank. The explosion was deafening. A fireball erupted, throwing the wolves backward and shattering the windows of the diner. The shockwave rattled the water tower, nearly shaking Sarah loose. In the chaos, amidst the smoke and the howling of injured wolves, Sarah dropped from the ladder onto the roof of the adjacent hardware store. She ran, jumping from roof to roof, her movements fluid and silent. She didn't stop until she reached the tree line of the national forest, 3 miles away. She collapsed against a pine tree, gasping for air, clutching her side. She looked back at the town. Blue lights were flashing in the distance. She had taken down 3 inside. The explosion would have incapacitated at least 4 more. The others would be scattered, confused, their senses dulled by the smoke and the ringing in their ears. 12 warriors. Half were out of the fight in under 3 minutes. Sarah wiped the blood from her cheek and looked at the blood on her fingers. It was dark, almost black in the moonlight. "Come and get me, Gideon," she whispered to the wind, "but bring more body bags next time." The boardroom in Seattle was made of glass and steel, overlooking the rainy grey expanse of the city. It was sterile, cold, and silent, except for the rhythmic tapping of a pen on a mahogany table. Gideon Blackwood sat at the head of the table. He was 30 years old, though his eyes held the weight of centuries. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than the diner Sarah worked in, but it did little to hide the raw power radiating off him. He was 6'4", with broad shoulders and hair as black as a raven's wing. His jaw was sharp, his stubble meticulously kept, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, grey, turbulent, and intelligent. He wasn't just an alpha, he was the Alpha King. He ran a corporate empire that fronted for the largest werewolf coalition in North America. He dealt in logistics, security, and technology. He didn't deal in failure. "Repeat that, Silas," Gideon said, his voice dangerously low. Silas, his beta and head of security, stood by the window. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Sir, the extraction team, they failed." "Failed?" Gideon stopped tapping the pen. "I sent 12 of my best enforcers, Unit 4, the same unit that cleared the rogue den in Portland last month. You're telling me they couldn't retrieve one female Omega?" "It's complicated, Gideon." Silas opened a folder and slid it across the long table. Gideon opened it. The first photo showed the ruins of Sal's diner. The second showed a hospital ward. Men, his men, were in traction, wrapped in bandages, hooked up to IVs. Leader Marcus, 3rd-degree burns to the face, blinded in one eye. Enforcer Cole, ruptured testicles and a shattered knee. Enforcer Davin, severe concussion and internal bleeding. Silas read from his tablet. 4 others have shrapnel wounds and hearing loss from a propane explosion. Gideon stared at the photos. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked confused. Did she have help? A rogue pack? A rival? "No, sir," Silas said. "Witnesses, and the surviving men, confirm it was just her. She utilized the environment, improvised weapons, guerrilla tactics. The locals say she worked there for 6 months, quiet. Kept her head down. They called her Molly." Gideon picked up the grainy photo of Serafina Hart from 3 years ago. The girl in the picture looked fragile. The report he was reading described a special forces operative, not a runaway Omega. "An Omega," Gideon murmured, testing the word. "An Omega who took down half a warrior squad in 3 minutes without shifting." "There's something else," Silas added, hesitating. "Spit it out." "The tactical report says she didn't just fight back. She herded them. She lured Marcus into a close-quarters engagement to disable the leadership, then used the explosion to disrupt the perimeter team's senses. It was strategic. It was alpha-level strategy, Gideon." Gideon stood up and walked to the window. He looked at his reflection. He saw the beast inside him, pacing, intrigued. For years, the council had pressured him to find a mate. They paraded high-born she-wolves in front of him, pampered, strong, pedigreed alphas and betas who bored him to tears. He needed someone strong enough to stand beside him, not just genetically, but spiritually. He had sent the team to collect Serafina Hart because she possessed a flash drive containing data on his company's internal finances, stolen by her ex-boyfriend, a low-level accountant who had since turned up dead. Gideon had assumed the girl was a loose end, a victim. He was wrong. "Is she still in Montana?" Gideon asked. Tracks disappear into the Kootenai National Forest. It's brutal terrain, heavy snow. The local packs are refusing to go in after her. They say there's a blizzard coming. Gideon buttoned his suit jacket. "Prepare the jet." Silas blinked. "Sir, you want me to send Unit 1? "No." Gideon turned, a predatory smile touching his lips for the first time in months. "Cancel my meetings. Ground Unit 1. Call off the bounty hunters." "I don't understand," Silas said. "Who is going to retrieve her?" "I am." Gideon walked to the door, grabbing his coat. "If she's capable of dismantling my men like that, she's not prey, Silas. She's a challenge, and I haven't had a challenge in a very long time." "She's dangerous, Gideon," Silas warned. "She might kill you." Gideon paused at the door, his grey eyes flashing gold for a split second. "She can try, but bring the medical kit. I have a feeling I'm going to need it." "And Silas?" "Yes, Alpha. I want her alive. If anyone else touches her, they answer to me. She's earned the right to face the king." The Kootenai National Forest was not a place for the living. Not tonight. The blizzard had descended with the wrath of a scorned god, turning the world into a swirling vortex of white blindness and biting cold. The temperature had plummeted to 20 degrees below zero. Serafina stumbled, her boots crunching through 3 feet of fresh powder. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. The adrenaline that had carried her out of the diner and through the explosion was fading, replaced by a hollow, aching exhaustion. The graze on her cheek had stopped bleeding, frozen shut by the wind, but the bruise on her ribs, where she'd slammed into the water tower ladder, throbbed with every ragged breath. She wasn't running anymore, she was trudging. Keep moving, she told herself. If you stop, you die. She knew the wolves wouldn't follow her in this. Not the hired guns. Enforcers were tough, but they were urban predators. They liked their heated SUVs and tactical vests. They wouldn't track a single Omega into a blizzard that could freeze the fluids in a car engine. But she also knew she had made a mistake. She had underestimated the king. A howl pierced the wind. It wasn't the chaotic yipping of a pack. It was a singular, deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the very trees. It was the sound of something ancient, something massive. Sarah froze, pressing her back against the rough bark of a Douglas fir. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her last weapon, a serrated steak knife she'd swiped from Sal's. It felt like a toy in her numb fingers. She closed her eyes and focused on her other senses. Her Omega nose was weak compared to an Alpha's, but fear sharpened it. She smelled it. Not the wet dog smell of the enforcers. This scent was distinct. It smelled like ozone, crushed rock, and expensive scotch. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. He came himself. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Gideon Blackwood was here. She pushed off the tree, forcing her legs to move. She needed high ground. She scrambled up a rocky incline, slipping on the ice, tearing her fingernails on the frozen granite. She reached a small ridge overlooking a frozen creek bed. Below her, a shadow detached itself from the storm. A wolf. It was the largest beast she had ever seen. Its fur was pitch black, darker than the night, absorbing the little light the moon offered. It moved through the deep snow with terrifying ease, its muscles rolling fluidly under the thick coat. It wasn't tracking her footprints. The snow had covered those minutes ago. It was tracking her. The wolf stopped. It looked up. Even from 50 yards away, through the driving snow, Sarah saw its eyes. Glowing gold, intelligent. They locked onto hers with a precision that made her knees buckle. He didn't growl. He just watched her. It was a silent challenge. Run, little rabbit. Let's see how far you get. Sarah didn't run. She knew she couldn't outrun an alpha of that size. Instead, she looked at the frozen creek below. The ice was thin in the center where the current was strong. She slid down the embankment, deliberately stumbling onto the ice. She moved to the center, the ice groaning ominously under her weight. She held the knife out, her hand trembling. The black wolf trotted down the bank. It stepped onto the ice, its weight distributed perfectly. It moved slowly, stalking her. "Come on," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "Come and get me." The wolf lunged. Sarah didn't try to dodge. She dropped flat. As the massive beast sailed over her, she slammed the hilt of her knife into the ice, right where a stress fracture had formed. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot. The ice beneath the wolf's landing spot shattered. Gideon plunged into the freezing, rushing water below. Sarah scrambled backward, gasping, crawling toward the bank. She had done it. She had dropped the Alpha King into a frozen grave. The current would drag him under the sheet ice. He would drown. She reached the solid ground and collapsed, staring at the black hole in the ice. 1 second passed. too. I killed him, she thought, a mixture of relief and horror washing over her. I just killed Gideon Blackwood. Then, a massive black claw hooked onto the edge of the ice. The ice shattered again as the wolf hauled itself out of the water with impossible strength. Shaky, wet and furious, the beast stood on the bank. The water on its fur was already freezing into icicles, but the fire in its eyes burned hotter than before. The wolf's form shimmered, bones snapping and reshaping, fur retracting into skin. A moment later, Gideon Blackwood stood there. He was naked, his body sculpted like a Greek statue, steam rising from his skin as his alpha metabolism burned through the cold. He didn't look cold. He looked annoyed. He walked toward her, unbothered by the storm, unbothered by the fact that he had nearly drowned. Sarah tried to scramble back, but her back hit a rock wall. She was trapped. Gideon stopped 2 feet from her. He looked down, water dripping from his dark hair onto his broad chest. That, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest, was very rude. Sarah lunged. It was a desperate, feral move. She thrust the steak knife toward his abdomen. It was slow, clumsy, the product of a woman who had nothing left but spite. Gideon didn't even flinch. He caught her wrist in midair. His grip was like a steel shackle. He didn't squeeze hard enough to break the bone, but he squeezed hard enough to make her drop the knife. It clattered uselessly onto the frozen rocks. "Enough," Gideon said. He yanked her forward. Sarah slammed into his chest. The contact was electric. For a second, the world stopped. The cold vanished. A wave of heat, pure molten heat, exploded where their skin touched. It wasn't just body warmth. It was the spark, the biological imperative that told a werewolf they had found their genetic equal, their fated match. Sarah gasped, her eyes widening. No, not him. Anyone but him. Gideon froze too. His pupils dilated, swallowing the grey of his irises until they were black voids. He inhaled sharply, smelling her properly for the first time, without the interference of the diner's grease or the forest pine. Vanilla. Rain. And underneath it, gunpowder. "You," Gideon whispered, sounding genuinely baffled. "You are my—" "No!" Sarah screamed. She headbutted him. It was a solid hit, right to the nose. Gideon's head snapped back. Blood, bright red alpha blood, sprayed onto the snow. Most alphas would have snapped her neck for that. Gideon just laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. He wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand and looked at her with a terrifying intensity. "Feisty," he muttered. "I like it." He moved faster than her eyes could follow. One arm swept behind her knees, the other around her back. He scooped her up effortlessly, lifting her high against his chest. "Put me down," Sarah thrashed, hammering her fists against his shoulders. It was like hitting a brick wall. "If I put you down, you'll freeze to death in 10 minutes, Gideon said calmly. He turned and began walking back the way he came. "And since my wolf has decided you're important, I can't let that happen." "I'm not important. I'm a waitress." "A waitress who knows how to make a structural stress fracture in river ice." Gideon raised an eyebrow. "Stop lying, Serafina. It's insulting to both of us." He carried her for a mile through the blizzard. The heat radiating from him was the only thing keeping her alive. Slowly, the fight drained out of her. Her shivering became violent, uncontrollable tremors. Hypothermia was setting in. "Stay with me," Gideon commanded, his voice sharpening. "Don't you dare close your eyes." They reached a clearing, where a sleek, black helicopter sat idling, its rotors churning the snow. It wasn't a standard rescue chopper. It was military-grade, bearing the Blackwood crest. Gideon ducked under the rotors and jumped into the cabin. "Go!" he shouted to the pilot. Get us to the jet, now! He kicked the door shut, sealing out the roar of the wind. The cabin was warm, lined with leather. Gideon sat on the bench, still holding Sarah in his lap. He grabbed a thermal blanket from the emergency kit and wrapped it tightly around her. "Silas!" Gideon barked into the headset. "Sir, I thought you were—" "I have her. Prepare the medical bay on the jet. She's hypothermic. And get me a set of clothes. I'm naked." Sarah, huddled in the blanket, looked up at him. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. She looked at his chest, at the rapidly healing bruise where she had hit him, and the scratch marks from her nails. "Why?" she rasped. Gideon looked down. The playfulness was gone. His face was hard, angular, and severe. "You stole something from me," he said. "The drive. Where is it?" Sarah let out a dry, hysterical laugh. I don't have it." Gideon's hand tightened on her shoulder. "Don't lie to me. My accountants said the data was downloaded to a drive found in your apartment in Seattle. You took it." "I took it," Sarah whispered, her vision blurring as the warmth began to hurt her frozen skin. "But I destroyed it." Gideon stared at her. "You destroyed a drive worth $300 million? "It wasn't money," she slurred. "It was names. List of names." "What names?" "The Omegas," she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut. "The sleeping Omegas. The ones like me." Gideon stiffened. The air in the cabin grew heavy. "Sleeping Omegas?" he repeated softly. "That program was a myth, a rumor from the old war." "Not a myth," Sarah breathed, her head lolling against his chest. "I was number 7. She passed out. Gideon sat there, the vibration of the helicopter humming through his bones. He looked at the unconscious woman in his arms. She looked so small, so fragile. But if what she said was true, she was a living weapon. A genetically modified assassin created by a rogue faction of the Council, designed to appear weak, smell submissive, and kill alphas when their guards were down. And she was his mate. "God help us all," Gideon whispered. The Blackwood Eye was less of an airplane and more of a flying palace. It cruised at 45,000 feet, far above the storm that was ravaging Montana. The interior was cream leather, walnut wood, and gold accents. Sarah woke up in a bed that was softer than anything she had ever touched. For a moment, she thought she was dead. Then the smell hit her. Antiseptic, and that lingering scent of storm and scotch. She sat up. She was wearing a silk pajama set that was several sizes too big. Her hands were bandaged, her cheek was stitched. She wasn't in a cell. She was in the master suite of the jet. The door opened. Gideon walked in. He was dressed now, wearing a fresh black suit, though he had forgone the tie. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. "You've been asleep for 6 hours," he said, walking over to a chair opposite the bed and sitting down. He crossed his long legs. Sarah pulled the duvet up to her chin. "Where are we?" "Over Idaho, technically, heading back to Seattle." "I'm not going back there," she said, panic rising. "They'll find me." "Who?" Gideon asked. He took a sip of his drink. "The people who trained you? The ones who made you a sleeper?" Sarah went pale. "I shouldn't have told you that. You were delirious. Truth tends to spill out when you're freezing to death." Gideon leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Here is what I don't understand, Serafina. The sleeper program was shut down 10 years ago. All the subjects were reportedly euthanized. How are you alive?" "I ran," she said, her voice hard. "I was 14. I killed my handler and I ran." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "And the drive?" "My ex-boyfriend found it. He didn't know what it was. He thought it was corporate blackmail material on you. He tried to sell it. That's why he died. Sarah's hands shook. I took it back to protect the others. The list of names on that drive, it's a hit list. If the council finds out we're still alive, they'll hunt us down. Gideon was silent for a long time. He studied her face, looking for the lie. He found none. You think I'm part of the council, Gideon stated. You're the Alpha King. You are the council. I am the king, Gideon corrected. The council is a group of old men who think they control me. We are not the same. He stood up and walked to the bedside. He placed the glass on the nightstand. I have a proposition for you, number 7. Sarah bristled at the code name. My name is Seraphina. Seraphina, Gideon amended, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into that command tone that made her skin prickle. You are being hunted by the people who created you. You are also being hunted by my enemies who think you have my financial data. You have nowhere to go. I was doing fine until you showed up, she snapped. You were working at a diner in Butte. That is not fine. That is hiding. Gideon leaned over her, placing his hands on the mattress on either side of her hips, trapping her. I can protect you. No one touches what belongs to me. I don't belong to you, she hissed. I don't care about the spark. I don't care about biology. I am not a pet. Gideon smirked. I don't want a pet. I have plenty of those. I want a partner. A partner? My security chief is good, but he thinks like a soldier. You, Gideon looked at her bandaged hands. You think like a survivor. You took down my best men with a pot of coffee and a propane tank. I need that kind of thinking. You want to hire me? Sarah asked, incredulous. I want to claim you, Gideon said bluntly. But I'm willing to start with hire. You work for me. You help me root out the traitors in the council who are restarting the sleeper program. In exchange, I give you protection, resources, and the heads of the men who hurt you. Sarah stared at him. It was a deal with the devil, but looking into his grey eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Truth. And if I say no, then I land this plane, give you $5,000 and wish you luck. You'll be dead in a week. Sarah bit her lip. She knew he was right. Fine, she whispered. I'll help you. But I sleep in my own room, and you don't touch me unless I say so. Gideon stood up, a triumphant glint in his eyes. Deal. The intercom buzzed. Sir, the pilot's voice was tense. We have a problem. Gideon tapped his earpiece. Report. Seattle Air Traffic Control just denied our landing clearance. They say there's a security threat on the tarmac. And, sir, I'm picking up 2 fighter jets on the radar. They aren't military. Gideon swore. He looked at Sarah. Who else knows you're on this plane? He asked. Sarah's eyes went wide. The drive, it had a tracker, a passive signal. I thought destroying it killed the signal, but if you swallowed a component, or if it rubbed off on you, Gideon realized. They aren't here for me, Sarah said, swinging her legs out of bed. She ignored the pain in her ribs. They're here to blow you out of the sky, so there are no witnesses. Gideon moved to the window. 2 dark shapes were cutting through the clouds, flanking the private jet. Mercenaries, Gideon growled. Sterling. Victor Sterling? Sarah asked. The Alpha of the East? The very same. Gideon turned to her. Can you fight? Sarah ripped the IV out of her arm, blood welling up. She didn't flinch. She stood up, swaying slightly, but her eyes were clear. Give me a weapon, she said. Gideon smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf about to go to war. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek silver handgun. He handed it to her, handle first. Welcome to the team, Seraphina, he said. "Try not to shoot me." The plane lurched violently as a warning shot tracer zipped past the wing. "Hang on!" Gideon shouted. The jet entered a steep dive. The Blackwood Y screamed. It was a mechanical shriek of tearing metal and failing hydraulics as the right engine exploded, engulfed in a ball of orange fire that illuminated the dark clouds over the Cascade Mountains. "Brace!" Gideon roared, his voice cutting through the deafening alarm klaxons. He didn't scramble for a parachute. He didn't run for the cockpit. He threw himself over Serafina, pinning her body into the corner of the leather bench seat, using his own massive frame as a shield. Sarah felt the alpha power surge off him, a tangible force field of protective instinct. She buried her face in his chest, smelling the terror and the fury in his scent. "Bennett!" Gideon shouted into the comms. "Status! Hydraulics are gone, Alpha!" The pilot's voice was strained, but calm. "I can't hold her level. We're going down in the foothills. 3 minutes to impact. I'm going to aim for the tree line to break our fall." "Do it!" Gideon commanded. He looked down at Sarah. His grey eyes were wild, the pupils blown wide. "Listen to me. When we hit, the fuselage will likely shear. If we survive the impact, Sterling's kill team will be on the ground within 10 minutes. They tracked the transponder." "I have the gun," Sarah said, her voice shaking, but her grip on the silver pistol iron tight. "Good girl." Gideon brushed a stray curl from her forehead. "If I'm unconscious, you leave me. You run." "Not happening," she retorted. The world tilted violently. Gravity became a crushing weight. The windows shattered as the pressurized cabin compromised. The roar of the wind was deafening. Trees, massive pines, began to whip past the windows, snapping like matchsticks against the hull. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. The jet plowed through the forest, shearing off wings, tearing up the earth, and finally coming to a grinding, screeching halt against a granite cliff face. Darkness swallowed them. Sarah woke to the smell of jet fuel and blood. She was pinned. Not by debris, but by Gideon. He was slumped over her, dead weight. "Gideon?" She pushed at his shoulders. He groaned, a low, pained sound. He shifted, coughing, and rolled off her. A jagged piece of metal from the overhead bin had sliced through his jacket and into his shoulder. Blood was soaking his white shirt, dark and ominous, but he was moving. "Status!" he rasped, his eyes snapping open. The gold in his irises was flickering, his wolf fighting to heal the trauma. "We're alive," Sarah whispered. She scanned the cabin. It was decimated. The front of the plane was gone. Bennett was likely dead. The back was open to the night air. Snow was drifting in, mingling with the smoke. Gideon gritted his teeth and ripped the metal shard out of his shoulder. He didn't scream, just let out a sharp hiss. "We need to move. The fuel tank is ruptured. If a spark hits it..." They stumbled out of the wreckage into the freezing mountain air. The snow here was waist deep. The silence of the forest was eerie after the chaos of the crash. But the silence didn't last. Thwop, thwop, thwop. Helicopter rotors. Not the rescue kind. 2 matte black choppers hovered over the crash site, their searchlights cutting through the trees. Ropes dropped. Men in tactical gear began to rappel down. 6, 10, 12 of them. "Mercenaries!" Gideon spat. He leaned against a tree, his face pale from blood loss. "Sterling hired the Red Hand. They hunt supernaturals for sport." Sarah checked the magazine of the pistol. 12 rounds, plus 1 in the chamber. "Can you shift?" she asked. "If I shift now, the healing will slow down. I'll bleed out faster in wolf form," Gideon admitted. "I'm at 50%, Serafina." 50 is better than 0. She looked at the approaching lights of the tactical teams. They were moving in a pincer formation. "Stay here. Draw their fire. I'm going to flank them." "No," Gideon grabbed her wrist. "You are not a soldier." Sarah looked at him. For the first time, she let the mask slip completely. The tired waitress from Butte was gone. In her place was number 7, the product of a lab designed to kill gods. "I'm not a soldier, Gideon," she said, cold as ice. "I'm a scalpel." She pulled her wrist free and vanished into the shadows. Gideon watched her go, stunned. She didn't make a sound. She didn't leave a footprint. She simply ceased to exist in the visible spectrum. A mercenary stepped into the clearing, his rifle raised. "Target acquired. The Alpha is by the tree. He's wounded." "Take the shot," a voice crackled over the radio. The mercenary tightened his finger on the trigger. Snap! The mercenary jerked violently, then collapsed. Sarah stood behind him, having emerged from the snow itself. She had severed his brain stem with a combat knife she'd taken from his own belt before he even knew she was there. She picked up his assault rifle. The chaotic symphony of violence that followed was something Gideon would never forget. Serafina moved like smoke. She was a blur of violence. She didn't fight like a werewolf. She didn't rely on brute strength. She used leverage, speed, and ruthlessness. She shot out knees. She used the environment. She turned their own radios against them, whispering false coordinates to draw them into traps. "Man down, Sector 4. Where is she? I can't see her. She's not an Omega. Intel was wrong. She's a ghost." Gideon, fueled by a mixture of pride and terrifying awe, forced himself to stand. He couldn't let his mate fight alone. He let the change take him. Bones cracked, fur sprouted. The massive black wolf exploded from his human form, roaring a challenge that shook the remaining snow from the trees. The remaining 6 mercenaries froze. They were trapped between a legendary alpha wolf and an invisible assassin. The wolf tore through the center of their formation, a wrecking ball of teeth and claws. He didn't kill, he maimed, he broke, he terrified. He drove them back. Meanwhile, Sarah was on the ridge. She raised the rifle, looked through the scope, and took 3 shots in rapid succession. Bang, bang, bang. 3 men dropped. Silence fell over the mountain. The black wolf stood amidst the carnage, panting, steam rising from his bloody muzzle. He looked up at the ridge. Sarah stood there, silhouetted against the moon. She dropped the rifle and slid down the embankment. She walked up to the wolf. He was growling low in his throat, the adrenaline still high. She didn't flinch. She reached out and placed her hand on his snout. "It's over, Gideon," she whispered. "Down." The command was soft, but the authority was absolute. The Alpha King, the most feared wolf on the West Coast, whined softly. He leaned into her touch, and then, slowly, collapsed into the snow, shifting back into his human form. He was naked, bleeding and shivering. Sarah stripped off her jacket and draped it over him. She knelt in the snow, pulling his head into her lap. "You're crazy," Gideon whispered, his eyes closing. "I'm expensive," she corrected, a tear finally escaping her eye. "Don't you dare die on me, Blackwood. I haven't even cashed my first paycheck." The Blackwood estate did not look like a home. It looked like a fortress built to defy the ocean. Perched on the jagged obsidian cliffs of the Oregon coast, it was a sprawling masterpiece of steel, slate, and reinforced glass. To the world, it was the retreat of a reclusive billionaire. To the supernatural underground, it was the lion's den, the primary stronghold of the Alpha King. For 2 weeks, Serafina Hart had been a prisoner within its walls, a pampered, protected, and healing prisoner, but a prisoner nonetheless. She woke with a gasp, her body jerking upright in the silk sheets. Her hand instinctively flew to the pillowcase, searching for a knife that wasn't there. "Easy." A deep voice rumbled from the corner of the room. "You're safe. You're in the West Wing." Sarah blinked, her heart hammering against her ribs. The room was bathed in the grey light of a coastal morning. Gideon sat in a leather armchair by the floor-to-ceiling window, a tablet in his hand. He was wearing loose grey sweatpants and a black t-shirt that strained against his chest. His recovery had been supernatural. The massive gash in his shoulder from the plane crash was now just a pink scar. Sarah, however, was human enough to still feel every bruise. Her ribs were taped, her cheek was still tender, and her mind was a fractured mess of adrenaline and exhaustion. "I almost killed the maid yesterday," Sarah whispered, staring at her hands. "She dropped a towel. I had her pinned against the wall by her throat before I even realized what I was doing." Gideon set the tablet down and walked over to the bed. He sat on the edge, the mattress dipping under his weight. He didn't reach out to touch her. He had learned quickly that she needed space when she first woke up. "Martha is fine," Gideon said softly. "She's worked for Alphas her whole life. She's seen worse than a reflex reaction from a traumatized warrior." "I'm not a warrior, Gideon," Sarah said, her voice trembling with self-loathing. "I'm a sleeper, a biological booby trap. The Council designed me to be a sociopath. If I stay here, it's only a matter of time before I hurt you, or your pack." Gideon's eyes, usually the color of storm clouds, darkened to a charcoal black. "Is that what you think? That you're broken?" "I think I'm dangerous." "Good," Gideon said, leaning in. "Because peace is a lie, Serafina. I don't need a pacifist. I need someone who understands the nature of the war we are in." He stood up and offered her a hand. "Get dressed. There is something you need to see." Sarah dressed in the clothes that had been provided for her: black cargo pants, combat boots, and a fitted thermal sweater. It was a far cry from the waitress uniform at Sal's diner, and it felt terrifyingly natural. She followed Gideon through the winding corridors of the estate. The place was crawling with security. Not the standard enforcers she had fought in Montana, but the Royal Guard. These men and women stood 7 feet tall, radiating power that made the air thick and hard to breathe. Yet, as Gideon passed, they lowered their heads in absolute submission. And when they looked at Sarah, they didn't look at her with the disdain usually reserved for Omegas. They looked at her with wariness, respect. They knew who she was. They knew she was the one who pulled their king out of a burning fuselage. Gideon led her into a circular room at the center of the estate, the war room. The walls were lined with screens. In the center was a massive holographic table displaying a map of the West Coast. Standing around it were 3 people: Silas, his beta, a severe-looking woman with silver hair, and a man in a tailored suit who smelled of ink and bureaucracy. They stopped talking when Sarah entered. "She shouldn't be in here, Alpha," the silver-haired woman said, her voice sharp. "This is High Council clearance only." "If she leaves, I leave," Gideon said calmly. He pulled out a chair for Sarah. "Sit." Sarah sat. She felt the eyes of the room boring into her. "Report," Gideon commanded. Silas cleared his throat, looking exhausted. "The crash has been spun as a mechanical failure. The media is buying it for now. But the underworld knows the truth. Victor Sterling is bragging about it in private channels. He's claiming he killed the king." "Let him brag," Gideon said, his fingers drumming on the table. "It makes him careless." "There is more," the bureaucrat said nervously. "The council has issued a summons. They want Serafina Hart handed over for evaluation regarding the violation of the Omega Code. They are citing the Sleeper Protocol laws of 2014. They say she is contraband tech, not a person." Sarah felt a cold chill run down her spine. Contraband tech. That's all she was to them, a faulty machine. They have threatened to sanction the Blackwood Pack if we do not comply within 48 hours, the silver-haired woman added. Gideon, we cannot fight the Council and Sterling at the same time. Logic dictates we cut the loose end. She looked directly at Sarah. Sarah stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She's right. Sit down, Gideon said. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha command, vibrating with power. Sarah froze, her knees buckling slightly, but she fought it. She glared at him. I'm not going to let you destroy your kingdom for me. I'll turn myself in. I can take out at least 3 of the council elders before they put me down. It's a good trade. The room went dead silent. The silver-haired woman looked at Sarah with wide eyes. Gideon stood up slowly. He walked around the table until he was standing inches from Sarah. He ignored his generals. He ignored the map. He looked only at her. You think this is about charity? Gideon asked, his voice low and dangerous. You think I saved you because I felt sorry for the stray dog in the snow? Yes, Sarah snapped. Or because of the mate bond, biology holding the leash. The mate bond makes me want to protect you, Gideon admitted. But that is not why I am keeping you. He turned to the holographic table and swiped his hand. The map changed. It showed a complex web of financial transactions, offshore accounts, and shell companies. The drive you destroyed, Gideon addressed the room. Serafina memorized it before she smashed it. Didn't you? Sarah blinked. I have a photographic memory. It was part of the conditioning. Recite the account number for Victor Sterling's Cayman holding, Gideon challenged. 77 Alpha-Verify 902, Sarah rattled off automatically. Routing number ending in 445. Silas typed it in. The screen flashed red, then green. Access granted. Holy hell, Silas breathed. It's the entire slush fund. It proves Sterling is bribing the council elders. Gideon turned back to Sarah. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. She is not a loose end, Gideon announced to his generals. She is the gun, and I am the only one who knows how to aim her. He looked at the silver-haired woman. Tell the council that Serafina Hart is not contraband. Tell them she is under the personal protection of the king. And tell them that if they want her, they can come to the front gate. I'll leave it unlocked. He dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Leave us. When the room cleared, the silence was heavy. Gideon walked to the balcony doors and opened them, letting the roar of the ocean flood the room. He stepped out, and Sarah followed. The wind whipped her hair across her face. The drop to the ocean was 300 feet straight down. It was terrifying and beautiful. You're declaring war on the world, Sarah said, leaning against the railing. For an Omega. For my Omega, Gideon corrected. He reached into his pocket. Sarah stiffened, expecting a weapon, a drive, a document. He pulled out a ring. It was stark, brutal, and elegant. A band of black titanium with a vein of raw, unpolished meteorite running through the center. It didn't sparkle. It absorbed the light. I don't do romance well, Gideon said, his voice straining slightly. I don't do flowers. I don't do poetry. I am a man of violence and business. He took her left hand. His grip was warm, rough, and calloused. But I have been alone for a very long time, Serafina. I have been surrounded by sycophants and people who want my power. When the plane was going down, when I thought we had 10 seconds of life left, my only regret wasn't the kingdom. It wasn't the money. It was that I hadn't had enough time to figure you out. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, hot, angry tears. I'm broken, Gideon. I have nightmares. I have triggers. I might never be normal. I don't want normal, Gideon said fiercely. Normal women don't jump off water towers. Normal women don't snipe mercenaries in a blizzard. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been forged from her own bones. In the ancient laws, before the Council corrupted them, the Alpha didn't just claim the Omega. The Omega claimed the Alpha. It was a mutual pact of survival. You cover my blind spots, I cover yours. He looked into her eyes, searching for the answer. Seraphina Hart, will you stand beside me while we burn Sterling's empire to the ground? Will you be my queen, not to sit on a throne, but to fight in the mud? Sarah looked at the ring. She looked at the scar on his shoulder that he had taken for her. She felt the spark in her chest. Not a flicker now, but a roaring bonfire. She stopped fighting the instinct. She stopped fighting the wolf inside her that had recognized him in the snow. On one condition, she said, her voice steady. Gideon raised an eyebrow. Name it. Sterling is mine, she said. You can take his money, you can take his lands, but when we find him, I pull the trigger. Gideon smiled. It was the smile of the devil finding his favorite sin. Done. He pulled her in, his hands tangling in her hair, and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It tasted of salt spray, danger, and a promise of absolute devastation for anyone who dared to stand in their way. As they broke apart, the sound of a helicopter approached in the distance. Silas stepped onto the balcony, looking pale. "Sir," Silas said, "we have a situation. Sterling just went live on national television. He's challenging your claim to the throne." Gideon didn't look back. He kept his arm around Sarah's waist, pulling her flush against his side. "Let him talk," Gideon said, looking out at the horizon where a storm was brewing. "He's just auditioning for his funeral." Sarah touched the cold metal of the ring on her finger. She looked at the helicopter approaching, then up at Gideon. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. "Get the jet ready, Silas," Sarah commanded, her voice ringing with a new authority that made the beta pause. Gideon looked down at her, pride radiating off him in waves. "You heard the Queen," Gideon said. "We have a pack to hunt." And that is the story of Seraphina Hart and Gideon Blackwood. From a small-town diner waitress to the queen of the Alpha King, proving that rank doesn't determine strength, spirit does. But here is the question for you guys. Gideon was ready to burn down his entire kingdom to protect her, but he also put her right on the front lines. Do you think a true alpha protects his mate from the world or gives her the weapons to fight it? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to see your debates on this one. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more pack members. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss part 2 of this saga, where we might just see Seraphina take down the entire council. Thanks for watching, and stay wild.